Are we live? Sorry, I haven't done this in a while. Hello, BookTube. I hope you had a wonderful reading month in May. I myself read three good ones: one nonfiction, one memoir, and one mystery thriller. Let's kick things off with the memoir that came out around the beginning of May. The title is You Never Know by Tom Selleck. Tom here is one of my personal favorites because to me, he really is the ultimate leading man. You need him to play like the macho role. He's got that. He's believable, and you need him to play like the love interest, for example. He can pull that off too. The man wears many hats. And right off the bat, this has to be one of the best titles I've ever heard of for a memoir. Like you never know. 'Cause ain't that the truth about life? You can try and prep for it, but you never know what way things are going to turn out. As you can imagine, like any other memoir, it's full of stories, the life lessons along the way, and people he encountered. One thing that really jumped out at me as I was reading this, even when Tom was a young man, it's very clear a lot of people in the business liked him and wanted to help him succeed. I'll give you one case in point. When he was a young man, he was cast in a movie starring the blonde bombshell Mae West. And this one is the 70s. She was older. She hadn't done a movie in like a little over a decade, so this was a big deal. And Tom here landed the role of young stud number 4. No name, just young stud number 4. Actually, there's a little picture of them in here. See right there, Mae West. Not only was she like a blonde bombshell back in her day, but she had brains too. So like she wrote her own stuff. Very very influential. You see, Tom. This photo was taken. They were doing publicity for the movie at this famous restaurant in LA at the time called Chasen's. It was like a place where all the celebrities went, the place to be seen. And she had Tom walk in to the restaurant with her arm in arm. Like she was definitely trying to get him some exposure. And even when Mae was on television promoting the movie, she mentioned Tom by name. He was like 24 years old. Like who's this nobody she's promoting? That was a nice gesture. That was just the first example. One other little example of people looking out for him. In the late 70s, early 80s, there was a big hit TV show at the time called The Rockford Files, starring James Garner, another all-time great leading man. If people know him nowadays, you might remember him from that movie The Notebook. Like he and Ryan Gosling played the same character as a young man and an old man. There's a picture of them on the side here. Well, first there's Tom in his National Guard days. See, right around point, that's James Garner right there on the set of the show The Rockford Files. Turns out one of the writers behind the show was a fan of Tom and wrote a role just for him. And that was a nice thing. It's like he was a nobody. He wrote a role just for him. And in the credits, he even wrote like starring Tom Selleck. People are like, who the hell is Tom Selleck? It's amazing how things spawn from there. Tom later on got a call from a little man named Steven Spielberg as he was making his new movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, that's a whole story there in itself too, because Tom was the original Indiana Jones. Like in the time, Tom was working on the big hit show. Not working. The show was in the can, as they say, Magnum PI. Unfortunately, the folks at Magnum PI didn't want to let Tom do the movie as well because they saw what was going on with Spielberg. They knew it was going to be a big hit, and they thought that might conflict with their show. So even Tom says he's a little bitter about that. That would have been nice to have been Indiana Jones. But I'll tell you this: if he was Indy, like I promise you this, the franchise would have been just as big. It's like he's got the charisma and the charm. He could have pulled it off too. And of course, like you're talking to a massive Indiana Jones fan here. Like got all like the Funko Pops on my shelf here. This is coming from me. Like all due respect to Harrison Ford, the franchise would have been just as big if Tom was cast in that role too. And the story of this hit show Magnum PI was amazing too. So originally, Tom did not want to do it. Like he read the script, he thought it was garbage. At the time, the show was like it was coming off as like a cheap like James Bond knockoff. This guy with a girl on each arm on a beach in Hawaii. It was terrible. But the man I found out, James Garner, gave a little piece of advice. He says, "You don't want them, but they want you. So you have power now." So with that, Tom, a lawyer, and the writers got together, completely changed the show, or rewrote the show. All of a sudden, it became like this corny show, the James Bond knockoff, to a show about a man who, from 18 years old, was in the military. He's now 33 years old, never had the chance to be 23. And the writer of the show is a Vietnam vet. It really gave a sense of realism and authenticity. And Tom, being in the National Guard, was believable because he was legit. That show ran for like 9 seasons, or 8 seasons rather. It was incredible. I still watch it to this day. It still holds up. Let's move on to the mystery thriller I read. It's called Camino Island by John Grisham. Now, it's a very specific reason I wanted to reread this at this time because John has now written 2 sequels. There was Camino Island, The Camino Wind, and like literally like a week ago, Camino Ghost came out. It also happens to be John Grisham's 50th novel, and it's a fascinating story. Like it's one of those stories like I just love the characters. Why I wanted to revisit it. It's about well, first the book starts off with a bank heist. It's like the original manuscripts of F. Scott Fitzgerald are stolen from the Princeton Library, and it's a really like well written. Like the whole heist is really like explained in detail how they get away with it. It's actually quite intense. Then we meet our main character, this young woman named Mercer Mann. Mercer Mann is approached by like the security of the insurance company because they're going to have to pay $25 million in insurance to Princeton University. And of course, they don't want to do that. So they suspect that a man named Bruce Cable. Bruce Cable lives on Camino Island. He's an independent bookstore owner. The security agency thinks he had something to do with the heist, and he may have possession of these manuscripts. So they want to hire Mercer, because as a young girl, like she used to go to Camino Island with their family. She herself had published a novel, and like she's about to lose her job at the school the university she works for. So she's perfect. She can go in, blend in, and she kind of go undercover to help find these manuscripts. And in doing so, the agency will pay off all of her student loans and pay her a life-changing amount of money. Like all the money they pay her, it's as life-changing as it is still a drop in the bucket to the alternative, which is $25 million to Princeton University. Also worth noting too, this book is also like a love letter to independent bookstores. It's a very important cause to John Grisham himself. It's like the main character, Bruce Cable, he has a bookstore in Camino Island, and like a lot of the people living on the island too, his friends, they're all former writers. Like there's a couple, they write trashy romance novels. One guy tried writing a novel himself. So it's a love letter to authors and independent bookstores. Like even in the book too, you get like a whole backstory about Bruce Cable. You find out that like Stephen King was at his store for a signing. I don't know if you know this too. Like Stephen King and John Grisham in real life are great friends. So like it's kind of funny. Like Grisham put Stephen King in his book, and then in Stephen King's book later, when the boy talks to the ghost, a character is named John Grisham. It's off the top of my head. It might have been a lawyer. It's like he's not present in the book, but they just mentioned by name a lawyer named John Grisham in that book. It's kind of funny how lately the two of them put each other in each other's novels. One thing I must admit too, major fault with this book was the outcome of the robbers. Like we open up with the heist, we follow them, you think things are about to pick up, get pretty intense, and then it just dies out, like nothing happens. That was disappointing, but like I said, like the characters in this book were so lovable and were so interesting. So I reread this book. I'm gonna read the sequel, and definitely gonna read Camino Ghost in a little while. And finally, the nonfiction book I read. As you probably tell by the hat, big baseball fan here. So there's a writer named Joe Posnanski. He's a sports writer, read a number of books. This was a big book he wrote called The Soul of Baseball, a road trip through Buck O'Neill's America. This came out back in 2006. And before I sum it up too, like there's a quote here right in the front. It says it compares the book, a writer from Sports Illustrated compared the book to Mitch Albom's Maury. If you're not familiar with that, a man named Mitch Albom, like 25 years ago, he wrote a book called Tuesdays with Maury about his time with his college professor who was dying from ALS. And it's one of those books like Maury, as he's dying, he's reflecting on life, what's really important. It's one of those types of reads. The book came out like over 25 years ago. Like they just put out a special edition. That's a mainstay. So personally, in its own little way, I thought it was a perfect comparison for this. Combines like kind of like the philosophy behind Tuesdays with Maury and a little history in baseball on top of it. Now, Buck O'Neill, the man himself, uh, he died like a year after this book came out. He was 94 years old. A hell of a life. So in his day, it was the days of segregated baseball, where like all the black players could only play in what they called the Negro Leagues, and a lot of great players came out. Like Hank Aaron, Lord, there were like so many great players who were stuck in there while during the segregated times. So Buck here was a player and a famous manager too, more so a manager. And sadly, he never got his chance to be a big league manager in Major League Baseball. He could only be a scout and a coach. Even then, like, so the premise of this book, the writer Joe Posnanski, he follows Buck around for a year, and really a year, a baseball season. And the book's broken into 4 sections, which is quite clever. It's like winter, spring, summer, and fall. Because that's essentially the life of a baseball season. Season starts in winter, teams getting the rosters ready. The springtime comes around, all the players report to training camp, they play the practice games. Season begins on through the summer and then ends in the fall. So as we read about Joe side by side with Buck, you really learn like what an unbreakable spirit Buck O'Neill had. Like you could always try, you could never you could never dampen his spirit. It was really inspiring. Like a couple examples, like Joe and Buck, they're on an elevator in New York City. Like New York City like any city, it's a tough place to live. Like a lot of things like beating you down. So Buck's in the elevator, and there's like a woman next to him. She's kind of a little sad look on her face. So Buck looks at her. He goes like, "Oh, wow, a young woman your age in New York City. This must be exciting." And then like she's looking at him like, "Who are you?" And next thing you know, by the time they get off the elevator, they both got big smiles on their faces. She gives him a hug and a kiss goodbye. That was it. That's the type of man Buck O'Neill was, like with people in general, especially as we find out as we travel along with Buck through America, even to his dying day. He was always an inspiration to even like the players of the previous decades. I'll give you one example there. Uh, Along the way, Buck O'Neill crosses paths with like a local legend where I am, a player named Monte Irvin. This guy Monte Irvin, very sadly, uh, at the time, at the time this book was written in like 2006, Monte was in his mid 80s, and so like the 30s and the 40s, segregated baseball. Monte Irvin, he could not get into the major leagues, and said even the scout who found him said he was just like Joe DiMaggio. And if you don't know who that is, all you need to know is this: Joe DiMaggio was one of the greatest players who ever lived, and Monte Irvin was being compared to him. He still couldn't get into the major leagues. This is before Jackie Robinson. So then Monte, he served 3 years in the Army, World War II, came back, played in the Negro Leagues a few more years. By the time he was 30, he made it into the major leagues playing for the New York Giants, now the San Francisco Giants. Back then they were in New York. And he still had a Hall of Fame career. Amazing career, played in the World Series. Nothing to be ashamed of. But even then, as I was reading the book, Monte at the time is in his mid 80s. Buck is 94. Even Monte at his age is still can't get over. He says like nobody saw me at my best. It was heartbreaking to read. And Monte kept crying. He's like, I could have been one of the greats. And Buck O'Neill would console him, really, just say, you are one of the greats. So that's the type of man Buck was with everybody he met. So yeah, this is what I'm going to keep in a special place. Every year when baseball season comes around, I can easily see myself rereading this every year to get myself in a baseball mood. And with that, folks, I'll wrap things up. As you know, we're a few days into June, and I got some more reading to do. I'm currently in a book club on Fable. We're rereading The Shining. I'm rereading The Shining because I never read Dr. Sleep. So before I read that, I want to reread The Shining first. And so, hope you guys have a good TBR. Hopefully there's plenty of 5-star reads in your TBRs. And I hope you guys have a wonderful June. Enjoy the warm weather. Take care.